Hi, I'm Matt Geiger. My goal is to get you the full, unbiased story on issues, not the liberal story or the conservative story. And that starts with understanding some background on the issues. In this video, I'm going to go through the history of free trade in America so that we can understand how our policies have evolved over time to the point they're at now. America's international trade policies start at pretty much the same place as a lot of other policy journeys in American history, with a disagreement between Jefferson and Hamilton just after the founding of our country. Now, I just want to clarify, neither Hamilton nor Jefferson favored complete free trade because at that time, in 1791, essentially all government revenue was brought in through tariffs, which are taxes imposed on goods imported into a country. But Jefferson believed America should be an agrarian society, and that meant keeping tariffs as low as possible to keep prices on imports low for farmers. Hamilton, on the other hand, wanted America to become a manufacturing nation, and that meant hiking up tariffs to protect local manufacturing from cheap goods manufactured in Britain. So that basically set the fight for the long-term political battle over tariffs from the late 1700s until about 1930. The Republicans represented the industrialized North, demanding higher tariffs to protect manufacturing. And the Democrats fought for the agrarian South, looking for lower tariffs to help drive exports of agriculture products and keep import prices low. Tariffs bounced back and forth between about 15% on the low end and 60% on the high end, tending towards that higher end of the range. And that was because Republicans controlled the government more often through the 1800s and early 1900s, and also the pro-tariff businesses had significant lobbying power. But the beginning of the end for high tariffs came with the SmootHawley Tariff Act of 1930, signed by President Hoover near the beginning of the Great Depression. This law had one of the highest tariffs in American history, nearly 60%. The problem with this is that a lot of America's trading partners raised their own tariffs in retaliation. What that did was reduce trade and exacerbate the effects of the Depression. Keep in mind that up until this point, Congress and the President had always managed trade with a one-sided increase or decrease in the tariff. They didn't really consult any other country when they were doing it. But this changed with the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934. This law that was signed by FDR gave the President the power to negotiate U.S. tariff reductions in return for reciprocal trade reductions from a trading partner. And this totally changed the game because for the first time, Congress actually had an incentive to lower tariffs. And there was also a group now that had an incentive to lobby Congress for lower tariffs, the exporters. As industries grew after World War II and benefited from the lower tariff rates, businesses also began lobbying for even lower tariffs. For a lot of the reasons that I just mentioned, the next major leap towards free trade happened in 1947, when America signed the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, at the United Nations Conference on Trade. The initial agreement included 23 countries and reduced tariffs by about $10 billion in trade, but this wasn't the only GATT round. Between 1947 and 1994, there were 7 additional rounds, and at each one, more members' countries joined and more tariff reductions were negotiated. As more nations signed the agreements and as negotiations got into more nuanced and politically tumultuous areas like agriculture subsidies, intellectual property rights, and services, members realized that a new organizational structure was going to be needed to deal with that added complexity. As a result, the World Trade Organization was born as part of the GATT agreement. The World Trade Organization is an intergovernmental organization that serves as a forum to negotiate trade agreements, but on top of that, it also provides current ground rules for trade in the form of agreements that were signed in the past GATT rounds. But maybe even more importantly, it has a dispute resolution arm to handle any conflicts on trade among member nations. Now keep in mind the WTO does help reduce tariffs and protectionist policies among members, but it isn't a free trade agreement. But in the early 90s, President Clinton did sign the North American Free Trade Agreement in a bipartisan effort. NAFTA, as it's more commonly known, is a 3-way free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And this truly is a free trade agreement with an initial reduction in tariffs, followed by complete elimination of tariffs over a phase-out period. The one exception to this was the always political trade in agriculture, which was negotiated separately with Canada and Mexico, and includes some tariff quotas and other restrictions. In addition to tariffs, NAFTA sought to eliminate non-tariff barriers to trade and protect the intellectual property rights of traded goods. The United States continued to expand free trade throughout the presidencies of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, signing a number of bilateral agreements with countries around the world, especially in Central and South America. These include a whole bunch of agreements with different countries like Australia, Bahrain, Dominican Republic, Chile, Colombia, Israel, Jordan, South Korea, Morocco, Oman, Panama, Peru, and Singapore, in addition to a few other Central American countries. As was the case with NAFTA, most of these agreements completely removed tariffs and non-tariff barriers, protected intellectual property rights, and made exceptions for various agricultural products. And that brings us to the present, where United States tariffs are at their lowest level that they've ever been in our history. Learning about this history has made me realize personally the significant role that lobbying powers played throughout the history of free trade and tariff legislation. Not just in recent history, but basically all along. Tariffs were at their highest when manufacturers pushed for higher tariffs, and FDR was only able to push the trend towards lower tariffs when he changed the game to create a special interest, the exporters, with a substantial incentive to lobby for lower tariffs. From that point, multinational corporations kind of took up the baton, and they had an incentive to lobby Congress for reduced protections. Regardless of whether the policy choices have been correct or not over history, I think it's really unfortunate that lobbies need to always have a seat at the table to get anything done. And the worst part is, I have a feeling that we won't be getting rid of the influence of lobbies anytime soon either. Thanks for watching.